Hello, welcome to the first training module for the FAIR data training for deep ocean early career researchers. And today's module is going to be about foundational practices for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data, FAIR data. So let me start with sharing our screen. Great, and you'll find these slides available to you online at this tiny URL address at the bottom. Now I'll launch into the slides. Welcome. If you're new to the deep ocean observing strategy world, this training is sponsored by the iDOOS project, so the Implementing a Deep Ocean Observing Strategy project that's funded by the US National Science Foundation. And DOERs, more broadly, is an international and interconnected network of deep ocean observing and mapping and modeling programs endorsed as a UN Ocean Decade program. So let me introduce myself. I'm Stace Beaulieu, and I'm a senior research specialist at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, USA. And during the training session, we'll be joined by a number of others from the DOERs program, including Karen Stocks, who leads the Seafarers group, which is the data group within the project, and Leslie Smith, who many of the doers in this project know already, the leader of the doer program within this project and our project manager as well. And the deep ocean early career researchers in this project, with a wonderful story map available online so we can learn more about each and every one of you. Before we get started with this training, I want to point to our principles of collaboration, which are available online. And in particular, point to we would like to create a very welcoming and respectful and inclusive environment for our participants to exchange a diversity of ideas during this training. And we have a code of conduct also available online. It's established by the Pangeo community, and this is a broader community for big data geoscience research. How will we use Zoom? So Zoom is our online platform for communication here during this training. And the first thing I'll do during the live training is we'll turn on the live transcription. We will not be recording the training session. That's why I'm here with you today on this recording. We'll be using the chat to communicate among participants during the live session. And we'll be using reaction buttons found usually in the lower portion of your Zoom screen. You can find the yes, no, slow down buttons, as well as a raise hand button and reactions like thumbs up. We do ask before raising your hand in the live session to chat with a seafarer who's on the call. Try that first. And we'll be doing polls and breakout rooms as other options within the Zoom. So what makes this course different? Well, it's not just the content. So some of the content will overlap with other training that is accessible to you online. But this is going to be a different course than just taking an online course, because we're going to focus on the live interactions. I'm recording the slides today so that we'll have more time during the live session to interact with each other. So it's more that this course will be different because of how we engage with the content during the live session and how we will engage with each other. And I'll try to use this phrase, learning by doing. DO for deep ocean, but doing because we'll try to do some practical exercises during the live sessions. My teaching philosophy is based on an interdisciplinary education model. It's a published model. It's called the Shield Shape Learner. And this means a researcher who has deep knowledge in a field of study, so discipline one represented here in this graphic, and then has a breadth of knowledge in other disciplines as well. But even more important for this training, the breadth I will consider skills or transferable skills in how to work with data. So we're going to be trying to help you expand your breadth in handling data, working with data, and in this training. And we'll be doing that within the context of oceanography and the disciplines within ocean sciences. So when we start the live training, we're going to start off with a poll, and this could be considered pre-training questions, right? And we'll be using these questions to gauge the learner's current level of satisfaction with data management, the learner's current use of programming and coding in their research, and their current level of confidence or not with knowledge with respect to FAIR data principles. And then we'll launch into the content of the course and just kind of an overview of the course. What will we learn? Here, this is using an infographic that was recently published. Provide the link here in the lower right, available in Figshare, and also available online so that you can click through all of the different examples provided for each step of this research data lifecycle. The graphic was developed in the DOERs program, as well with the Earth Science Information Partners, or ESIP Marine Data Group. And the goal of the course is to provide foundational practices that support this full research data lifecycle, as well as diving into practices specific to the ocean sciences. So we laid out the course kind of in order of this cycle, but we'll be trying to refer to each module from the other during the training. So if you jump in during module 3, you can catch up by looking at earlier module slides, but we'll try to link among the modules in each of the training sessions. Oh, I like to say this training was also based on a series of workshops developed at my institution, Woods Hole Oceanographic, developed by data professionals. And we like to say that we tried to capture more than 100 years of experience in less than 8 hours. In terms of what level will you expect to learn in this course, here we're using the Bloom's taxonomy of learning, in which we have a base layer in which we remember concepts. And if we can, we get as high up in this triangle or pyramid as we can towards being able to apply knowledge in our own context. So when you complete this series of training sessions, we hope that you may reach the level to be able to apply the practices to your own research. And for this module 1, which will start today, this sets the foundation for effective data management, focusing on you as an individual, your practices. We'll introduce the concepts of FAIR, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And we have these learning goals, getting all the way to apply foundational data management practices to your own research data in some ways. Understand how findable, accessible will apply to your own data, and to remember the benefits of making research data fair in general. So in the live session at this point, we'll probably be about 15 minutes into the discussion at that point. So we'll have done a poll as our quick dip, and we'll be about to jump into the slides, where we're going to provide some slides for our anchor article. So in our syllabus, we had 2 anchor articles today, the first of which is Wilson et al. 2017. So we'll go into that next. Then we're going to do a breakout room in the live session, where we'll spend about 15 minutes meeting people, discussing some of the practices that we just learned in the Wilson et al. Article. And then we will end the first session of this module with a demonstration leading into some homework. before the second session. I should add that this learning module is set up so that we have 1 hour live, and then we have some time off. We have a day off actually to do homework. We come back a day later, and we meet again for an hour for additional content. So the first anchor article by Wilson et al. Is called Good Enough Practices in Scientific Computing. It was written in a computational biology journal, but I do think the practices are applicable across disciplines, and we'll see that when we get into our breakout rooms. I chose 3 of the sections of this paper to focus on in the first module here today. And one is, first we'll start with data management. We'll do a little bit of software and project organizations. And then in the next session of this module, we'll touch on keeping track of changes. So with this paper, I don't want to scare you with all the text on this slide, but what I'm doing right here is I've copy pasted from the box 1 of the paper, which is bullet points essentially for their good enough practices for data management. This is all their bullet points, but I'm pointing out to 5 I'm going to provide examples for today, and then 2 that we will get into in subsequent modules. I'm going to step through each of these 5 in the subsequent slides, so I won't read them out here. As I go through the examples for each of these good enough practices, I want to highlight groups that are within the DOERs community, so within our Deep Ocean Observing Strategy community. And I've circled in red the different groups within these networks that we'll be learning about today through examples. Throughout the several modules of this training, I'll try to hit on as many of these partners as possible. All right, let's start with our first 2 good enough practices in data management. Save the raw data. Ensure the raw data are backed up in more than one location. So in the live session, I'm going to start by asking how comfortable we are with saving very large amounts of data, because saving the data can actually be a barrier sometimes. And ensuring a backup in more than one location can sometimes be a barrier as well. So we'll do a little bit of interaction in the class to kind of see where we're at as a group in terms of handling the very first steps in good enough data management. And then I want to point to a group within DOERs that is really doing this quite well, given the incredibly large amounts of data they are handling, as well as the frequency or velocity of data that they're handling. In this case, I'll highlight the Ocean Observatories Initiative. It is a US project funded by the National Science Foundation. And I want to point out seafarer Mike Vardaro, who is involved in the DOERs project and may be in the live session as well. You can ask questions through the chat. And here I'm pointing to the raw data archive for the ocean observatories, where essentially we'll learn later there are many ways to access data from this program, but this is a way for you to get the data before any processing protocols have been applied. Okay, next couple of good enough practices are to create the data you wish to see in the world, create analysis-friendly data. Creating the data you wish to see in the world, from my experience, is not that easy. Sometimes you really have to work at the data in order to even get it harmonized for yourself, to get it workable for yourself. Creating analysis-friendly data so that your script or program can, you can have an automated analysis, that takes some work sometimes. And I want to highlight a wonderful example of this work. It is a product that is being hosted at the Clyvar and Carbon Hydrographic Data Office, the CCHDO. And you can ask more about this product from seafarer Carolina Barris. Carolina, by the way, also is involved with the ESIP Marine Data Cluster. And this example is an analysis-ready and gridded GoShip product. So GoShip, actually, I didn't circle GoShip on the previous slide, but also involved in the DOERs program. And I acknowledge the creators of this product, Katsumata et al., hosted at this repository with a DOI, and that is a identifier for this product. And you can click on the link to go to its landing page. The last of the good enough practices in data management that I want to highlight is recording all the steps to process data. And here I'm going to expose some of my own work, and you will see how bad my handwriting is, but I hope this gets across the point that it can be a good exercise to figure out the steps that you're using to process data, to help understand how to write the metadata, how to write the processing metadata for your ultimate data product. So here we go. I'm showing you. This is my actual workflow diagram, handwritten, that I did with a student, where we were talking through all the different steps. The student was taking different input data, using different scripts to process those data into a final product. I'm indicating scripts in yellow, different steps. And so just to encapsulate this in kind of make it easier to see what's going on, I just have a very simple diagram here where I have simplified this into a pipeline, but we all know that it's not necessarily this wonderful linear pipeline in terms of inputs to outputs, right? And you can see that in my handwritten diagram. I was figuring that out. But to help the end user, if you think about ultimately you yourself using the data product a few months from now, or someone else in your lab group using the product, it can be helpful to try to get everything down, write it down, and then try to formalize it by writing out the steps and noting which products go into your scripts and things like that. So I've exposed you to a couple of examples for how different people and entities within DOERs are using these good enough practices for data management. So next, let's do a couple of examples for software. And here I'm not showing all the 10 principles that are I guess I should say 10 bullet points that are in that particular part of box 1 in the paper, but I'm just going to highlight 3, and then again we'll highlight a few more in subsequent modules. So I'm not going to read those here. We'll step through these. Place a brief explanatory comment at the start of every program. Give functions and variables meaningful names. Make dependencies and requirements explicit. These are the 3 that I tend to highlight when I work with students in my own lab group, for example. And I thought this would be a good point in the live session to take a pulse question of yes or no. We'll kind of get a feel for the room to see how many of us are using high performance computing in our research. Again, this is kind of to get a handle of how big the data are that we're handling and how common practice it is for some of us to be using scripts to process and analyze data. And then I'll provide an example within our networks. In this example that I'm linking you to, this is a notebook that was created for the US EarthCube program, and it is Python code that helps you to get Argo profiles stored on a data server called ArgoViz. I chose this example because I know that there are, first of all, Argo is circled on our slide earlier as part of the network within DOERs. And then also, I believe there is some talk of potentially interacting with ArgoViz as a resource at one of our upcoming DOERs workshops. The last section of the Good Enough Practices paper that I want to highlight before the breakouts where we will dive into these practices is the project organization. And rather than give you bullet points here, I actually just copy pasted and reorganized alphabetically their perfect project directory, right? What do you see here in this project directory? So here, first of all, this is the top level folder for a project. And within that, you see subfolders: data, doc, license, results, or SRC for source. Some of the things that you might notice are data is separate from results, but you're seeing there's a .csv file in results indicating comma separated variables. So same type of file type as data. So this is a case where we're distinguishing the input data from the output data products. SRC source, you're seeing a .py indicative of a Python script. So the script is being kept in a different folder than the data. License, by the way, we will talk about licenses in module 4. I could note that here. And documentation, you're seeing manuscript marked in markdown, the .md, and a change log, and a README as well. If this was project README in a folder, I often have a README for project folders, as well as if I had a repository for code, I would have a README there too. This might be new to some of you in terms of organizing in this way, but I want to give you an example within the DOERs program that is really representative of this. This is an actual screen grab from this repository, dataset-eDNA, that was prepared by a former seafarer, Diana La Scala Grinwald, from MBARI, Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. And it's really remarkable to me how well Diana is matching to the Good Enough Practices recommendations. You can see the raw is indicating the data that are inputs to the scripts. There are several scripts in the source directory, and then the processed products are in a different folder. So for other biologists in the room, I also provide an example of additional folder organizations from the slides. At this point in the live session, we'll break out, and we would want to use this breakout period not only to meet each other, right, but also to choose one of those bullet points from data management or software or project organization. Choose one that really hits you today, that you want to make some progress on, that hits you as important in your work, and use that as you're meeting others in the room, just to learn about how it's a great way to peer-to-peer to learn about how others around the world are solving challenges to particular ways of handling the data and software in their own work. Some of the rooms will have seafarers, so that'll be a little bit of peer-to-mentor type engagement. And when we come back from the breakout rooms, we'll be able to share a bit in chat for which of the bullet points really caught your interest. So yes, when we come back from the breakout rooms, we'll ask to share which practice you chose to focus on in the breakout room. And hopefully we'll be able to talk a bit in plenary about how some of us have had some challenges, but also reached solutions. As we move on from the good enough practices and try to learn more about the fair data practices, I would want people to think that we're not just going to think about the data. We're going to think about metadata, which are, some people define metadata as data about the data. It's not just the code or the scripts. It's also the software environment in which you are running that code, your platform and your environment. And then it's how you organize all of that in terms of the project organization. And then as we move into FAIR, it's also how you share all of that. And for this module, since we're focusing on you as an individual, think of sharing with your future self. You 5 months from now when you have reviews back on a paper, for example. So now let's do some doing. I said learning by doing, right? So we will start to learn about the FAIR principles, not by looking at the paper yet, not by looking at the anchor article yet, but rather by just seeing if we can find and seeing if we can access some data. So here I'm going to demonstrate finding and accessing data and code for a paper, but I'm using my own example here, right? Because I know all that went into how to make these data findable and accessible, and I can help you if you have questions about how to go about doing this. And so I chose a paper in which I helped, in this case, an early career researcher, Lauren, who has said it's okay that I'm using this paper as an example. And in the live session, we are going to do this live. We will click on the URL and we will see what happens. Here, though, in the recording, I'm just going to go to the next slide. In the next slide, I'm just showing you that ultimately we find in this particular journal, there is an open research section in which Lauren has provided links via the DOI, or digital object identifiers, for the data sets and for code that has been made available through the Zenodo repository. So I'm going to save talking about that until the live session. And the homework will be for the learners to choose a paper that is relevant to their own research, determine if they can find and access the data or software that support the results, and I'll provide a form to report yes or no, and what paper. In the live session, then we will end with a little feedback card, just so that we know what went well, what could go better the second time for the next session, and I'll move right into the next session. All right, so now we're moving on to the second session. I will have had a day in between so that learners would have had a chance to perhaps join the office hour the day before. I'll hold an office hour in which people can log in and ask questions with regard to the homework or with regard to the first session in general. So let's get back into the foundational practices for FAIR data. And I don't expect everyone to be able to make every session of this training. So we'll start each session just acknowledging that some people may be new in the room, and we want to introduce each other, and of course, respect each other, recognize our principles of collaboration and code of conduct, and then proceed just acknowledging how we will use Zoom again in this second session. Then we will recap the first session, just again, because I don't expect people to be able to come to every single session. So I'll be providing here just some comments with regard to, things that happened during the live session that we learned from each other. And then we'll be able to start with the second session. All right, so here we go. First thing is, let's relate back to way last year. Last year, Andrea McCurdy provided some of the training for the deep ocean early career researchers, where we learned about the framework for ocean observing. And I saved this slide because Andrea provided this slide, the process diagram for the framework, and she circled the data product creation and data assembly, and quote, said these steps relies on the adoption and use of FAIR principles. So I just wanted to say, we're trying to relate the training across all the years of this project. So during this year, we'll also have some other leadership training opportunities for the doers, and I'll be trying to ensure that this data training is well aligned with those other training options, as well as our annual meeting. So what will we learn in the second session? So we're gonna first, we'll finish the recap. We'll look at the results of the homework, and we will then dive into slides related to our second anchoring article, the Wilkinson et al. Article about FAIR data. Today's breakout rooms will be a deep dive to discuss data organization and management, in particular discussing vulnerabilities, or we'll get more into organization if people are more interested in that. And then we'll have some slides to learn more. The first thing will be results from homework, and it'll be really interesting to see the types of journal articles that the learners looked into, and how easy was it to find or access data from those papers. So I said learning by doing. So we already tried to find and access, but we haven't really looked at what does FAIR really mean? What is the actual definition of FAIR data? So our infographic provides this nice link, this wonderful resource, How to FAIR. Has some nice explanatory kind of, just overview text on, just kind of gets you into understanding what is FAIR, why do FAIR, right? And I like the way that they talk about these things to keep in mind. One, that both humans and machines are intended for the data. So you'll notice in the anchoring article, there's a focus on machine accessibility or machine use of the data. So here in our live sessions, obviously, we'll focus on the human interaction. The FAIR principles apply to both data and metadata. And the paper goes further to say that the principles apply to other digital scholarly outputs. The principles are not necessarily about open data, and that's true. So we will kind of learn more about open data as part of open science in the second module, module 2. The FAIR principles are not rules and not standards. They're guiding principles. So I'm going to advance a slide, and my laptop froze for a second, so I'm going to just do a little quick. Let's see if it refreshes. I hope this doesn't happen during the live session. All right, I'm back. Great. So the original FAIR guiding principles in this anchoring article by Wilkinson et al. 2016 in the Scientific Data Journal. And this wonderful graphic to demonstrate findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable with a nice reusable license, share alike. And we'll learn about that in module 4. So here I'd like to step through the actual principles as written in the Wilkinson et al. Article, and we'll talk a little bit about what they mean, because the writing is very different than in oceanography, right? So this is a very technical document, and the writing is supposed to be across domains. So you note in the article, it has some examples that are kind of within the biological sciences, but their principles are written to be very general so that they can be applied across domains. So the writing might be hard, right, to understand the first time. So we'll try to step through these and give examples from the ocean sciences so you can really start to get a feel for what they mean. The first one under findable is that data, in this case, they're saying that in many cases, the principle applies to metadata as well as data. So start with data. Data are assigned a globally unique and persistent identifier. We've already been seeing that with the DOI, the digital object identifier that we found in our homework in the demo. Data are described with rich metadata. So far, we've only talked about, I've only defined metadata as data about data, right? But if data are described in such a way, for example, with keywords, using words that can be searched on, that's a way to get towards the findable. Many times when you submit data to a repository, they will ask for keywords. So it can be pretty important actually to specify those keywords. Next one, data are registered or indexed in a searchable resource. So as a very good example of that, you can ask our seafarer Karen, because I believe one of Karen's new projects is kind of focused on that findable number 4, the searchable resource. And why, Karen? So I actually took a quote from a announcement of Karen's new project. And here I'm going to read some of the quote. To understand and address global deep sea challenges, we must find and leverage data from across national and international data facilities. So at some point, we'll have Karen introduce this new project that helps with search engines finding ocean science data. Accessible, the A in FAIR data. We already did our homework with accessible, and that was whether we could actually, bring the data into our own world, into our own environment, whether we could actually see the code. So the first one is the data are retrievable by their identifier using a standardized protocol. And in that case, we used a DOI to access data from a landing page. And there were many ways to access those data when we went to the particular repository in my demo homework, but all of those ways use standard protocols. The second one, metadata are accessible even when the data are no longer available. I added the extra phrase onto that, or not online, because sometimes there's a landing page for the data, but the data are so huge that they cannot be provided through one of these standard ways easily. So you literally have to request a hard drive. And now, this is not the case, although I did use the Ocean Observatories Initiative as an example of really big data. The cool thing here about this link that I'm providing here for how to access data is that this program that you can ask seafarer Mike Vardaro about has many ways to access data from their holdings as a human, also as a machine. They have a machine-to-machine interface and other application programming interfaces to access their data. So ultimately in modules, I believe it's in 3 or 4, we'll do an example that can include accessing data from their stores. Interoperable, the I. I1 is hard to understand for me. It says data use a formal, accessible, shared, and broadly applicable language for knowledge representation. So that's really written with machine-to-machine communication in mind. And so when I read this today, I just think about it as a way to formalize how you label things in your data and formalize how you format things in your data. And it's gonna really relate to the next option, which is the reusable. And you'll see there's kind of a lot of overlap between interoperable and reusable in these guiding principles. I2 is use vocabularies that follow FAIR principles, and vocabularies in this case mean controlled vocabularies, terms that are agreed upon by communities. And in the ocean sciences, we'll get into that in module 3. And the last one is data include qualified references to other data or metadata. And in this case, it's similar to the use of vocabularies, but how you relate terms to each other. And as an example of how we can start to try to understand what is meant by interoperability, I want to point again to questions that we can ask for our seafarer Carolina from the CLIVAR, the CCHDO data office. And in this particular office, which is one of our DOERs network partners, they are taking on the use of the climate and forecast, or CF, conventions, and they're producing NetCDF, or this is a particular, oh goodness, I'm actually blanking on what the CDF stands for, sorry, but the F is the format. So essentially providing standardized formatted data sets that are inclusive of standardized metadata so that they can be used interoperably among other, not just humans, but other machines being able to use the files. Finally, reusable. So reusable is, when you read the paper by Wilkinson et al., it's really their end goal is to support a data management process so that ultimately the data that are provided out to the world are reusable by others. And again, today we're focusing on you as an individual. So I want to think about your future self and how you would be able to reuse your data, in a few months or in a few years. And this includes richly describing your data with metadata. And but the first 1.1 principle here is with regard to releasing the data with a clear and accessible license. So we'll do licenses in module 4. The second one is associating your data with detailed provenance. I didn't mention provenance earlier, I should have. Provenance is the history of a data set, how that data product came to be. And if you think back or look back to the first session in my workflow diagram that I did by hand, and then I formalized it by saying inputs and outputs, the provenance is how to trace back to from your product to your raw data. And the last one here is meeting domain relevant community standards. So as an example of that was on the previous slide, where the CCHDO office is using climate and forecast conventions and the NetCDF format. So this is a standard that's being used within the community of ocean sciences to attain interoperability and future reusability. And I also want to refer back to another example that we used from the first session, and this is from former seafarer Diana Lascala-Grunwald. And the example was in the first session, I showed the project organization in this GitHub repository, but I also want to point out that what Diana is doing in this workflow is producing a data product that is standardized to the Darwin Core standard that's used by the Ocean Biodiversity Information System, or OBIS. So Diana, Darwin Core is a format standard, but also provides a vocabulary of terms. So Diana is essentially meeting that number 3 bullet here on this slide, meeting that community standard so that the data can be reused by others through OBIS. So all the different ways that we can say, there's so many different benefits of making research data fair. And here I'm quoting from a handbook that is linked here by Engelhardt et al., a new handbook for fair data training. And I'm pointing out just 2 phrases from this handbook and kind of how they relate to today's module and subsequent modules in this training. So first off, how does making data fair benefit ourselves as researchers? So it should help us with managing time and storage of data, making it more efficient, and we'll learn in module two how it's going to improve our collaboration across disciplines and across the partnerships that we make in the DOERs community. And we'll learn in modules 3 and 4 that we're going to enable better data integration within our own discipline, within other disciplines in ocean sciences, and with a goal of supporting research that can, apply to global challenges like climate change or sustainable development goals. And part of the reason why DOERs is a UN Ocean Decade program. And I know that some of the folks on the call here will be from different countries. I want to point out that there are national offices for the Go Fair program, and this is an initiative to improve fair data for research. This is across all disciplines, so it's not specific to oceanography, but I wanted to point this out because national offices may have relevant training materials offered specific to the funding that's in your country or in different languages as well. So before we get into our breakout rooms in this session, I'm heading back to the infographic and I'm pointing out the laugh section. So we've learned a little bit, now let's laugh a little bit together. And I want to thank seafarer Dawn Wright for this wonderful graphic that she put together. And it shows you pretty clearly, a picture tells 1,000 words, right? So data, sorting the data, arranging the data for visualization is not as great as going so far as to telling a story with the data. So thank you, Dawn, for helping us see the importance of data management in one image. And then I want to thank this resource that we found online for a YouTube video that is very helpful in understanding good reasons to have good enough practices for data management. And so if you do access this horror story about data management, you'll be able to think about those good enough practices we learned in the first session and think about how you might solve the challenges that are experienced in that video. So rather than a horror story, we're going to talk solutions to challenges. And the solutions can be fortified with one more section from that good enough practices paper. And so I'm going to highlight 2 bullets from the keeping track of changes section. One is back up almost everything created by a human as soon as it is created and keep changes small. So these I've definitely experienced, and I chose these 2 because of my personal experience, and they will become applicable when we go into breakout rooms and talk about vulnerabilities. So today for the breakout rooms, you actually have a choice. So this particular activity that I'm highlighting first is really to talk about how we may be vulnerable and how we can solve this challenge of data storage and possible data loss. So we'll describe the activity and the discussion points during the live session, but we want to make sure that people also have the opportunity to discuss, if they prefer, the other activity in this lesson that is linked here. This other activity relates back to the first session of this module with regard to organization of files, and it will probably try to do the breakout rooms so that the learners have a choice between the vulnerability activity and this one, the organization activity. We'll come back after the breakout rooms and we'll ask learners to share in the chat which discussion did they choose. Maybe we'll learn about, maybe there was some convergence in a room on how to solve the challenge. Maybe there was a divergence in the room. Maybe there was a opposition on what was the best way to do something. I'm interested to hear how the different learners from all the different disciplines and different countries involved in this project will respond to these activities. So we'll conclude with some slides from seafarer Sarah O'Connor at the US NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, and Sarah will not be able to join in the first live session, but looks forward to subsequent modules. And again, I'm going to have to fix my laptop. Let's see if this refreshes. I hope I have you. Okay, I'm back. And I have to share again. Here we go. Okay, great. So I want to thank Sarah for this slide, and it really follows on to our breakout room. So I'm highlighting a couple bullets that Sarah shared at the International Coral Reef Symposium Data Management Workshop last year. The first bullet was prevent data loss, right? So we learned some solutions to this in the breakout rooms, and Sarah listed about 10 or more different ways in which data can be lost, some of which were already highlighted in the vulnerabilities activity, from server failure. We didn't talk about format obsolescence or malicious malware type attacks. Error. Ooh, I have an example for that from my graduate school days. Loss of commitment to storage of the data, but I just thought, it was interesting that Sarah also had on the list bears. So that can be I guess I would maybe list that with natural disaster, but I think it'll be interesting to hear from the breakout rooms what they found in terms of data loss. So Sarah also highlights the importance of data management to handle overwhelming amounts of data. So way back in the first session, we did the pulse to find out how many of us are handling terabytes of data at a time. It's not just amounts, but often variety. Sometimes it's very hard to manage a lot of small files as well. The importance of data management for better accessibility and reuse. Sarah's highlighting here the A and the R in FAIR data. And the last two bullet points I want to highlight from Sarah are more often required than not. So different funding agencies in different countries have different requirements, but in general, in the US at least, there are requirements for providing a data management plan with a new project, for providing metadata for the data, and for long-term storage or sustainability for that. So we'll be looking into these topics in module 2 and 3. And I've already said earlier how we'll be talking about open data as part of open access in module 2. I love this graphic, and I want to thank these instructors from a carpentries incubator that I found online for sharing this graphic. And it's just really so illustrative of why it's important to start early to think about sharing out your data, to think about FAIR data from the beginning. So here They're saying how data management is a continuous process, and in Module 2, we'll be talking more about this research data lifecycle. And on the left panel, we have sharing data at the last minute, and we have a lot of time in red. Work necessary at the last minute, a lot of effort at the last minute. And on the right, we have a plan ahead for sharing data, and we have a little bit of effort along the way during the cycle to handle the ultimate sharing of the data. There's so many resources to learn more, so I'm selecting just a few here to highlight. One is a searchable clearinghouse, and I've mentioned ESIP, the Earth Science Information Partners, earlier. This is a data management training clearinghouse where you can search on the different holdings, and it includes multiple languages. The second item is one of the links from the Infographic. It's a helpful article, Simple Guidelines for Effective Data Management. And the last item under data management is helpful for many of our early career researchers are in graduate school. And so this is another ESIP resource. It was created by ESIP fellows. And it's kind of like what I wished I learned in grad school with regard to data management. Under software, I'm highlighting the lessons from the Carpentries, which is a worldwide organization to help with learning programming skills and data handling skills. There are wonderful lessons online in multiple programming languages. And the other item I'm highlighting here is that FAIR principles I mentioned earlier were intended for all sorts of digital scholarly objects. And so in this case, this is a paper applying principles to software. It's brand new, and we won't have time to really get into that in this training. And the last item here is with regard to project organization. And this course offered this year through Cyverse, which is another US NSF funded project. They have some wonderful resources online, which really build on some of the foundational data management practices that we talked about here, and then build those up into more computational research project management. So we'll end the session by doing some pulse feedback to see how comfortable we are now with applying foundational data management practices to our own data. We'll see if we understand at least findable and accessible in FAIR data, and if we remember the benefits. We've only done one module so far, and we'll keep talking about the benefits as we proceed through the remainder of the training. Now I want to thank the AccelNet project, the Implementing DOERs project funded by the National Science Foundation, and I want to thank my colleagues at WHOI who helped initiate this training program that I then enhanced to, work with the iDOOS project. And feel free to reuse these materials. Ultimately, we'll be releasing these with a Creative Commons attribution license. And for questions about this course, please email me, or for questions about the project or DOERs in general, please email Leslie. Thank you. Let's see.